going to spend the next 45 minutes or so going through the overview of the general NPDES permit and what's different. There have been some recent changes that haven't changed. This permit hasn't changed since 2004, but it has recently changed. And those changes will go into effect in 2011. So we appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk about those changes. First, just going to start with the basics, what a general permit is. You hear the term a lot and kind of may wonder what is a general permit. Well, the permitting at the Pollution Control Agency, the way it works is you have general permits and individual permits for the largest category of feedlots, or CAFOs. And a general permit is any permit where you've got mostly similar things going on, to where it can all be in one permit, the conditions are all the same, or at least similar enough to where you can put it all in one permit. An individual permit is one that's specifically tailored to an individual feedlot, usually because they've got some sort of enforcement action going on, non-compliance, a pollution hazard, but it can also just be because they've got some other conditions they volunteered to do through an EAW process and therefore need an individual permit. Or they've got something special going on at their site to where they need an individual permit. Most of the feedlot permits for the CAFOs in the state are general permits. Of the 1,200 or so permits that we've got, all but about 25 of them are general permits. So it's issued for a 5-year period. It's required to be public noticed, which means we've got to put on our website, we've got to say that this particular feedlot is up for reissuance of a permit or is about to be permitted. Now, where if the public has concerns, they can get a hold of the agency. Typically don't, but it's an opportunity that's provided to the public. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. The NPDES SDS General Permit is a permit that combines the national requirements, the federal requirements, along with the state requirements. Hence, the NPDES is a national pollutant discharge and SDS state. So you got the national and the state combined into one permit. Therefore, the only thing you don't have combined in there is the local requirements, the county requirements, which can certainly be more restrictive and different, as you're well aware. This type of permit's been used since 2001 and are issued to sites that have no discharge, that use commonly used technologies where they don't need special permit conditions. And we use this permit for the concentrated animal feeding operations, the CAFOs, as well as feedlots that have over 1,000 animal units that are not CAFOs. And that often happens if you have multiple animal types and you're combining, let's say, beef and dairy or whatever. Neither one crosses the federal CAFO threshold, but you have more than 1,000 animal units total. So both those situations, we use this general NPDES permit. In fact, are required to have, by statute, general permit. Threshold for the general permit is we look at CAFOs, a large CAFO that the federal government defines. In the left column, 700 head of mature dairy cows, 1,000 head of beef, 20, and here we are at swine, 2,500 swine over 55 pounds. 1,000 animal units is 33. So the new federal thresholds, which went into effect in actually 2003, so they're not all that new, was 2,500. It dropped it a bit. And at that time, several people were 2004 and around that time, several people were in between these two numbers and had to get the new permit, the NPDES permit. If we look across the state, yes, sure.
Nurseries, that's 10,000?
Yeah, nurseries would be 10,000, yeah. If we look at the location of these permitted sites around the state, you can see really, about what you'd expect. Big clusters here in south central Minnesota, and then certainly many in southwest and southeast, and a few in the north part of the state. Again, about 1,200 feedlots covered by this type of permit. The permit that you're currently operating under is a 2006 general permit. and that's effective from June 1st of 2006 and was to be effective through May 31st, 2011. The 2011 general permit is the one that we just completed and was passed by our MPCA board and went through the whole public review process. That's going to kick in February 1st, 2011 and run through, for 5 years through January 31st, 2016. And that will replace the 2006 general permit on February 1st, 2011. So you got about a year before this really goes into effect. So during this next year is the time where we're going to be getting the applications in and issuing this new permit so that everyone's ready to go with it February 1st, 2011. Basically what this will do, the new permit will just provide the permit coverage for the same sites that already have the 2006 permit. So the schedule is this winter, we're going to be putting the application forms on the website. And then producers and their consultants can download those forms, fill them out electronically or by hand and submit them. And a letter will go out to remind people to do that this winter. August 1st, 2010 is the deadline for when these applications are due, and all their attached plans, the manure management plan, the emergency response plan, the air emissions plan, operations and maintenance plan, those types of plans all need to be part of the permit application. In fall of 2010, the MPCA will be reviewing the permit application, putting those on public notice that there's an intent to issue these permits, and then approving the permits in most cases, or if more information is needed, we'll come back to you and let you know what additional information will be needed. February 1st, 2011 is when the new permit goes into effect. This permit is a fairly wieldy document. Includes a lot of stuff, and it's meant to cover different types of manure, different types of management, different types of animals. It's intended to cover construction and just operations. So there's a lot that's included in the permit itself. But in general, it includes the land application requirements, the construction, operation, and maintenance, closure requirements, record keeping and reporting, as well as a whole bunch of other stuff that's folded into this one permit. There were some changes at the federal level. In 2003, EPA changed the rules. There was court cases that followed. Producer groups and environmental groups both sued the federal government, the EPA. They both won some things and lost some things, and so the judge decided what needed to happen. And one of the things that the judge said needed to happen was more opportunity for public involvement in the permitting over the duration of the permit. The judge thought that the public should know what's in the manure management plan before, or at least have the opportunity to know before the permit's issued, and that manure management plan should really be a 5-year plan so that the public has some idea what to expect over the 5-year period. So we have modified the permit in our process so that we can meet the new federal requirements, and we also have changed the permit so that we can adjust the manure management plan so that it is essentially a 5-year plan. And I'll talk more about what that means in a little bit. If we back up just a little bit, one of the things that the court said also is that anyone needs to apply for a permit if they have a discharge or propose to discharge. And we know with most of the total confinement swine, there's really no discharge, especially if they're following all the land application practices and requirements there. There's no discharges. But what we've got in Minnesota is something that is more restrictive than at the federal level at this point in time. And there's lawsuits going on, so that may be reversed what I just said. But at least right now, at the federal level, a total confinement, no discharging site would not need to apply for a permit. But we do have a state statute that says that the MPCA must issue these NPDES permits for any facility that has 1,000 animal units or more, or is considered a CAFO. So we follow that statute, and so we just continue on the same road we've been, where the NPDES permits are required. Now, there's different types of changes in the permit, in this new permit. Some are just made in response to the federal rule revision. Also, we didn't have enough clarity in our winter application of manure requirements or our feed storage area runoff, so we've clarified those areas to meet federal requirements as well. And we've added some specific conditions for if groundwater monitoring is conducted or if there's an anaerobic digester on the site. When we get the application in, again, those will be coming in due August 1st, so we'll be getting a lot of them, I presume, in July. But earlier is better if you're working on those. We will have to we'll take a review, and once we make sure that the permit application is complete, we've got to put that on public notice for 30 days. The public, we don't put the whole permit application where the public can view it, but we at least let the public know that you have an opportunity to go in and come to our office and see the application and the associated plans. They can comment on it. They can request an information meeting, a contested case hearing, or consideration by a citizens board. We've been doing this public notice for new construction for quite a while, and we really don't see much of any of this down here, really of any of it, or even people looking at it. But again, that stemmed from the federal level, and also in Minnesota we have a priority on making sure the public has due access to information that's going on in their area. So after this 30-day public notice, if there's no comments received, which we'll expect for most of the applications, we approve the permit and send out a new permit that goes into effect February 1, 2011. If we do have comments that are received, we need to address those comments, take a look at them, consider them. Possible that the permittee may be required to make changes to the facility, but we really go back to our rules and requirements, and we can't be requiring things in permits that are not already in state or federal law or statute. So there's a statute right now that says, PCA cannot just be putting things in permits that aren't already required by federal or state law or rule. So there were a number of changes related to land application of manure. The plan, instead of being a 1-year plan, needs to be a 5-year plan. I'll talk more about what all these things mean. The public notification of the MMP changes, I'll talk more about that, but if a manure management plan is changed and that somewhere in the middle of that period process, that 5-year duration of the permit, then there needs to be another notification going out. Winter application of manure, there's some changes there I'll talk about. Inclusion of land application records in the annual report. That's something, our annual reports is something that all the permit holders have to do every year by March 1st, submit that annual report. And now it needs to include all the detailed land application records. As well, the cropping year is considered now rather than a calendar year. I'll talk about all these things in more detail. First of all, the 5-year manure management plan. What we look at there is the first year of the plan is really the specific plan. Same as what we've always had. So if you've gotten a permit already, it's basically the same type of plan for this first year plan. What's going to happen that next year in terms of the rates, the nitrogen, phosphorus management, methods of application, timing, manure sources, all of that. For years 2 to 5, we know that you're not going to be able to predict everything that's going to happen, but what we do ask for is again, stemming from the federal rule changes, a methodology on how the nitrogen and phosphorus rates are going to be determined over the life of that permit. And also for each field that's going to be used and potentially be used in that 5-year period, include the crops potentially to be grown, methods of manure application, and seasons for spreading manure. So that's what we mean by a 5-year plan. It's not a 5-year plan where you have to map out everything you're going to do in the 5 years. It's 1 year of a specific plan, and then for the rest of it you're kind of describing how am I going to figure all this out for the remaining years, and what fields am I going to be using, what potential crops are going to be grown in those fields. So if we look at how to complete this new manure management plan, number 1 there, the detailed plan is the same as in the past permits. It provides the specifics management for the next year. 2, 3, and 4 are additions, and we've got some forms put together to try and make this more clear and easy. but it includes a methodology for how nitrogen and phosphorus rate determinations are made. And we allow several different options on how you can determine these rates. You just need to identify how they're going to be determined. Field information for 5 years, the crops, the methods, the seasons, and for those fields, the methods of application, the seasons where you expect to apply. There's a form also for that. And then also winter spreading. New requirements are that for liquid manure, it's emergency applications only, with a few exceptions. But we're also asking everyone to identify where those fields are going to be, those emergency, recognizing that they come up, so you should plan ahead, have some fields identified that would be the best for spreading that liquid manure in the wintertime. For solid manure, there's also some information that's needed on the fields to make sure that that can be done in a way that protects the water quality. The changes to the manure management plan only apply to non-transferred manure. So the transferred manure ownership, if you're selling your manure, it's going on to your neighbor's land, and they're controlling the rates and the methods of application and all. That's the same as it's always been. No changes there. So these changes only apply to the non-transferred ownership, because that's all the federal rules deal with. And again, all we're doing at this point is incorporating the federal requirements into the state requirements, state permit. The changes, if there's a change to the manure management plan somewhere in the 5-year duration of the permit, that does not require a new permit. It's not a permit modification. You don't have to apply for a new permit. But you will be having to notify the MPCA that this change is occurring. And the key, what we're trying to do is make sure that you develop a good methodology that really minimizes the chance that you're going to have to submit a permit, a manure management plan modification in the 5-year period of that permit. Hopefully, you can develop this one manure management plan that's good for the 5 years. But we do recognize there can be some unforeseen things that come up that you can incorporate into in that 5-year plan, and that you would need to notify the MPCA about. So here's how, if there's a change in the 5-year period, so you already got your permit, you've already done your manure management plan, and it's been approved, and all of a sudden you want to change something in year 2 or 3 of your permit, you would the owner send that request to the MPCA, and we have forms for doing that. And we find that, the change is fine, it's acceptable. If there's substantial changes, it's a term from the federal government, then it has to be put on public notice and put on the website. We have to notice those changes, that there's changes to the manure management plan. And then respond to any comments and revise, and then you would need to revise the plan if needed. If not needed, or if there's no need to modify, then we just notify that it's approved, and you're done. Ready to go with that new manure management plan. If we find that the changes are not substantial, then we just immediately approve it. And we do have to inform the public of that approval on the website. So, that's kind of those of you who like flowcharts, explains it. The substantial changes include addition of fields that are not listed. Again, if it doesn't apply to transferred ownership, but if you have a new field where you're going to be in charge of that application rate and all, that would be a substantial change. As well as planting a crop that's not listed. And the way we have our new forms is basically check off any crops that could be applied on all your fields. So we don't expect this will come up a lot. Change to the maximum annual rates for nitrogen and phosphorus would be a substantial change. And any change to the manure management plan that might increase the risk of nitrogen and phosphorus transport, such as the application methods, new manure sources, additional manure sources, timing of application changes, conservation practices are reduced so that you could get more runoff. Those are all considered substantial changes. Any other questions about the manure management planning process, these changes? It's a bit complicated, but when this permit application comes out, we're going to try and keep it simple by kind of keep it to these 4 separate areas and basically 3 new forms to fill out along with the traditional plan, and hopefully good to go for the 5-year period. And that is, we are seeing with winter application, I'll get to the details of that in a minute, but we get a lot of complaints on winter spreading, and for a number of reasons. I mean, it's a late spring, you get an application going on, it's going on in the snow, you get a snow melt, and it's a nice day, it's happening slowly, you got a lot of time for people to notice what's going on. They're out and about, and they can see often the difference in color in the runoff water where the manure is applied has a brownish tint to it, more so than the non-manured fields. You can see that. So we get a number of complaints, and then we follow up. Usually take samples, and you can often detect pollutants in that water. So there is a statewide requirement. You can't apply manure in a manner that causes pollution to waters of the state. So because the manure is transferred doesn't mean that they're off the hook completely, because there's still the state requirements that say you can't pollute or apply in a manner that causes pollution. So a person, when in doubt and wants to try and do their best, they can pick the flat fields, the ones that are meet all the setback requirements, but additionally it doesn't hurt if they want to work with the MPCA and say these are the fields that we're going to be using, just to it's one more way of covering themselves in case problems occur or the melt. But best to avoid those late winter applications. That's really a problem. And Wisconsin's gone to, for certain size facilities, saying nothing in February and March. So because of the same reason, just a higher risk for runoff and pollution. So if we go to the winter application restrictions, here's what we've got. For the CAFOs, this isn't for everyone, and the question comes up, well, what about the non-CAFOs? There's been no changes. Again, we're responding to what's changed at the federal level. It doesn't affect the non-CAFOs. If soils are not frozen and there's no snow, or injection is possible, you can apply all winter. So the bar shows, the bar is meaning when you can apply according to the permit. So if you can inject it, or it's not frozen or snow covered, then you're good to go. If Okay, now here we've got surface application of liquids on frozen or snow-covered soils. That's only allowed up to December 1. So if you get, freezes up in the middle of November, you still can apply, so can surface apply up to December 1. And then, of course, after thaw. But all this period in the winter, it's not allowed anymore with the liquid application starting in 2011, February 2011. Unless there's emergencies, or unless it's transferred ownership, or unless you have an individual permit that allows that. Then you get to the next one here, solid manure on slopes less than 6%, and they meet other requirements, and there's a whole list of other requirements. If they meet all of that, then they can apply throughout the winter. Solids on slopes over 6% or not meeting these other requirements down here, then it's the same period, December 1 until thaw is restricted. There's an emergency. Surface application of liquids on slopes less than 4% and meeting all the rate restrictions and 300-foot setback would be allowed in this winter period if it's an emergency. But it needs to first be approved by the MPCA, and the fields need to be approved by the MPCA. So ideally you plan for that ahead of time in the winter management plan, and you already got pre-approval where to go with that emergency, at least of the fields. Then you just notify the MPCA what's going on. Another, I think one of the biggest changes here is that the annual report, which gets submitted every March 1st, needs to include the details of the land application practices. And so that won't, for this March, that's not the case, but and it would be 2012, this will really be the first year it kicks in. When you're reporting March 1st, 2012, then you do include all the details here. And when we ask for the detailed records, we would like to see things, and the permit asks to see things on the cropping year rather than the calendar year. So we specified, tried to get it all into the cropping year, so that anything done with the agronomic situation, you were looking at a cropping year. And it's a cropping year, here's this, I think will explain it better, this diagram. Cropping year, so let's say the crop is harvested in the fall of 2011. Here's the point it's harvested. You're reporting, you got to report by March 1st, 2012. The cropping year would be this period between the fall of 2010 to 2011. Okay, so it's basically after you harvest this crop, anything that you put on for that crop to be harvested fall of 2011. That'd be the cropping year, and that's what the records from that cropping year need to be reported the following March, if that makes sense. There are a number of other changes in the permit that affect the facility operation. And I'm going to talk about each of these individually here, but this is the list, more comprehensive list of what's changed. And some things are, I wouldn't say less restrictive, but it's not all a tightening of everything. We'll talk about some of that. For example, here, perimeter tile outlets need to be checked instead of weekly. It used to be weekly, and now it's monthly. Instead of weekly, now it's monthly. So that's a less. It's just we didn't see any need to go out there weekly and be checking those things. So we're going to monthly. Daily inspection of the water lines. That's always been a kind of a painful requirement for you guys, and we're allowing equivalent methods. It's a federal requirement, but Minnesota, we're allowing anything equivalent, such as water meters, pressure gauges, or some other way of monitoring the water to know when you get a leak. And of course, the reason for that is that we don't want, same as you, you want to detect that right away so that you can deal with it and you're not having more manure and overflows and running into problems. We've got all this manure that you need to get rid of at an inopportune time. Anaerobic digesters were, in the past, always part of individual permits. Now we have anaerobic digesters built into the general permit so that it doesn't have to be, there's a little bit more cumbersome process, a few more fees with the individual permit. So I think that's something that'll benefit those who are looking at anaerobic digesters. Not that individual permits are a bad thing, I don't want to imply that either, but just it's a little slightly simpler to get them in the general permit. Solid manure stockpiles, we reorganized the requirements and we made sure that all the 70/20 requirements were in there. That was just an omission from the last permit. Really nothing new, it's always the same requirements. You'll just see it in the permit now where it wasn't in the past. Stormwater plans for construction. We require these stormwater pollution prevention plans if it's an existing feedlot and that's developed and disturbing an expansion, and you're disturbing one or more acres, then you need to have a stormwater prevention plan. If it's a new site, if you're disturbing 3 or more acres, it needs to have this plan. And also for new construction, there needs to be both temporary and permanent stormwater controls. So what we've done in this permit is there's a whole separate set of rules for stormwater runoff, and we've incorporated them all in here so you don't have to get two separate permits. Stormwater requirements are also within the same permit, so we don't need a separate fee or anything. It's all just the one feedlot fee. We modified in the stormwater plans, which are part of your O&M plan, you need to include actions to prevent pollution, erosion, and sediment from leaving the facility on an ongoing basis, even if you're not constructing. And any runoff that comes into contact with these other types of potential pollution sources need to be addressed in this stormwater runoff plan. Groundwater monitoring was also a situation that necessitated individual permits in the past in most cases. and we built it into the general permit so that if we need to have groundwater monitoring, if we've got a site that's in a geologically sensitive area, let's say pure sands, not much clay, depending on the basin design and the liner design, and some other factors here, we may require groundwater monitoring. And you guys deal mostly with concrete pits. In the concrete pits, typically we don't require groundwater monitoring. Every once in a while we'll require perimeter tile monitoring. But this is more the monitoring wells are for the basins, the large basins where you're holding millions and millions of gallons of manure and often just have a clay liner. So I won't get into the details. We got a whole process here, or just it looks more complicated than it is, but for groundwater monitoring, but I won't get into that here. Feed storage areas is another one that won't apply so much to the swine, but it will to other types of facilities. We've added requirement specificity as to what is allowed for feed storage areas. The leachate coming from feed storage needs to be collected right away and always collected and not allowed to reach waters. But a more common scenario is also you get the runoff, the rainfall that hits the feed area, and you get some level of pollutants that are picked up. So how do you deal with that? It comes in contact with the feed in some way. We have several different options in the permit to deal with that. One is collection in a liquid manure storage area. Another is collection in another receiving tank with transfer to the manure storage area. You're going to have a vegetated infiltration area that has berms around it, but it allows the infiltration, or a comparable system to 1, 2, and 3. Something else that some other design that your engineer comes up with. Another option, and this also is one that pertains more to beef and dairy than swine, but I know some of you work with multiple types of livestock. The impermeable cover, just the plastic cover, if that's well managed, and they clean the pad frequently so that you don't get contaminated runoff, more of a preventative approach, that can be used until there's some construction at the site that requires a permit, some sort of major modification at the feedlot that requires a permit, then you need to have some sort of containment at that point in time. So they're basically grandfathered in for a while until you expand or construct. Closure of the feedlots. We've made a distinction between temporary closures and permanent closures. And before they were all considered one type. So we've changed the permit to allow temporary closures and permanent closures to have some different requirements, recognizing that in some cases it's just going to be closed for a while, for a couple of years. And then there you keep a couple feet in the bottom of the concrete pit of manure just to protect that bottom. And with a more permanent closure, you got to remove all the manure. Record keeping and reporting will need for groundwater monitoring where that's required. Same with if there's construction for anaerobic digesters, and the manure management planning requirements. Also, as I mentioned earlier, there's some new reporting requirements for the records. We've added some definitions. Agricultural stormwater discharge, feed storage area runoff, all those are defined now. With this agricultural stormwater discharge definition, what that says it comes from the federal level. If you got an NPDES permit and you're following all your requirements and your permit and rule, and you end up with some sort of land application discharge, it's not really considered a discharge at that point. That's a violation of your permit. Okay? So the key is to be following your manure management plan and all your requirements and the permit and the rule. And then if a rainfall comes and someone detects some sort of pollutants, that wouldn't be a violation. That's where the manure management plan, the importance of the manure management plan too. Because let's say there's a complaint, we go out there, we see that there's a discharge, we monitor, sure enough there's some contamination. If the manure management plan was followed, an approved manure management plan, then it's not considered a discharge. That would be a violation of the permit. If the manure management plan wasn't followed, then it would be considered a violation of the permit. Often, if it's a very minor type of situation, we'd first send out a letter of warning, which is just saying that you need to do something different here. It's a violation. But we can also start with either a penalty, depending on the severity of it. Sometimes it's not a discharge, but we send out a penalty or a notice of violation for setbacks that aren't being followed, even though there was no discharge, or other violations you're applying on land that was not part of the manure management plan. Let's say for winter, it wasn't identified as a winter application site. So there's several ways that you can end up with having a violation, but there's really no discharge involved. So we take some level of enforcement for both types of situations. Stormwater, the Appendix C, I mentioned that. We've got that in the permit. Has been updated to include the stormwater rule changes. So I just want to end with some key reminders on things that will help you and stay in compliance and out of trouble here. One is to read and know your permit. It's on the web right now, and people who will get the permit, who likes to read stuff like that? I mean, it's the rare person who actually wants to sit down and read the permit. There's like a human nature barrier that goes up, says, yuck, I'm staying away. I got better things. I'd rather go to my Field and Stream or Sports Illustrated or whatever and read that. There is this barrier, but I would encourage everyone, not just relying on the consultants too, they can look out after you for a lot of things, but as a producer, you need to know what's in that permit. So I recommend you get your permit, or you go on the website, get it, or when you get it in the mail, go through and highlight the things that apply to you, because I know a lot of it doesn't. You're going to say, stockpiling, that doesn't apply to me. Well, you skip over that section, go to the next section. Highlight everything that you think you should know, just so that you're aware of it, and you're not caught off guard when there's an inspection or a follow-up to a complaint, and all of a sudden you're saying, well, I didn't know that. When in doubt and you see something that seems, I don't understand what that means, I don't understand what I'm supposed to do, talk to your regional MPCA staff. We've got at least 2 staff in each region throughout the state: Mankato, Rochester, Marshall, Wilmer, Brainerd, Detroit Lakes, and the Twin Cities. So you can, you should be able to get a hold of someone to get your questions answered. You've called before, haven't you, Jared?
I have called.
Yeah, maybe more than once. Permit for the maximum capacity at any one time. You got to get the word out on this, because this is a big deal. When you get your new permit application coming in, every year we're asking for animal numbers. And again, this goes back to the public needs to know like the major stuff going on, including the numbers of animals at the site. Just the way it is. So you need to make sure that you're putting the animal numbers down for the maximum that are going to be in the barn at any one time. So including the deads that you got to account for everything. The maximum at any one time in that size category. Because we're seeing a lot of annual reports come in where they got higher numbers than what they're permitted for. Or saying, well, my permit, I didn't, I figured X number of death loss and this, that, and the other thing. And so it's real important that you when you get this new permit, that you're putting in the maximum. Plan ahead to avoid the winter spreading. The winter spreading, not only is there a lot of bureaucratic requirements surrounding the winter spreading, it is an increased risk to the water quality. So for both reasons, plan ahead to avoid the winter spreading, and in terms of your storage capacity at your sow sites, and plan to avoid the winter spreading, I guess, would be the key point there. And also recognizing the last 3 falls we've had wet falls, to where if it hadn't dried up a bit, we'd have been in real big trouble in terms of having to winter apply. Get your annual reports in by March 1st, and we're sending out just a reminder postcard this year, but in following years we won't be sending out the reminders, just permit condition that you need to follow and keep track of yourself. Take all the plans that you submit seriously. This means the manure management plan, the emergency response plan, operations and maintenance plan, the air emissions plan, dead animal management plan, all those 5 plans, because they do become enforceable parts of the permit. So what you put on those plans, you could be held accountable for, and it's an enforceable part of the permit. So those are nothing to take real lightly. Be as inclusive as possible in the manure management plan. Again, we're trying to avoid the need for you guys to have to send in a form saying, I'm modifying my manure management plan. So include any field that you might be using. You might be using it all. And on those fields, note any possible crop you could be planting. Try and do everything you can to make that a very inclusive manure management plan for the 5-year period to avoid that new federal requirement of needing to renotice and go through that. Pay attention to the land application setbacks. You got to know your setbacks, because that's a real common violation we're seeing out there. It's getting better. A lot of progress has been made, and I think we're doing a lot better job now than we were, certainly 5-10 years ago. But still seeing some problems. Open tile intakes, the manure needs to be injected or incorporated within 300 feet. Same with let's say intermittent streams. Anything that's mapped is an intermittent stream on a USGS topo map. You need that 300-foot setback, or 300-foot incorporation zone, as well as a 25-foot setback. Have your permit in hand before constructing. Every once in a while we still see people jumping the gun